Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're stripping away the polish.
Yeah, we really are.
We aren't looking at a theory today. We are looking at what the author basically calls a battle plan.
A very aggressive battle plan.
Right. We have a manifesto on the table that is, frankly, uncompromising. It's deeply controversial, and it is completely obsessed with a single, pretty terrifying idea.
Which is that the system isn't just broken, but that it is actively designed to break you.
Exactly. The book we're diving into is titled Agricultural Revolutions, Men Providing Through Technology and Grid.
And it's written by Conrad Riker.
Now, before we get into it, I just want to remind everyone watching or listening, if you value independent analysis of texts that, the mainstream media is absolutely terrified to touch.
And they are terrified of this one.
Oh, absolutely. Hit that like and subscribe button right now. It helps us keep the lights on and keep digging into these controversial sources.
And we should say right up front, we are here to analyze the text.
Yes. Good point. We are not endorsing the viewpoints in this book.
Yeah.
There is a lot of politically charged content here, touching on everything from gender roles to institutional capture.
Right. Both left-wing and right-wing sacred cows get slaughtered in this book.
They really do.
Yeah.
So our job isn't to take sides. Our job is to impartially report on the content Riker provided. We're just trying to convey the ideas exactly as they are laid out in the source material. And honestly, if the ideas in this deep dive resonate with you, do not wait. Agricultural Revolutions is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Yeah, you're going to need the source material.
If you want the full blueprint, the actual step-by-step schematics we're going to discuss today, you need to buy the book. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and grab it.
Because we're only going to be able to give you the strategic overview here.
Right, the high-level stuff.
Exactly. The text itself is incredibly dense. It's packed with technical diagrams, specific biological protocols, engineering schematics. You really need the book to execute the plan he lays out.
So let's jump in. Let's start with a core premise. Riker comes out swinging right from page 1.
He really does. It's a jarring read.
It sits somewhere between, a gardening guide.
A tactical field manual.
Yeah, and a Declaration of Independence.
Riker isn't interested in sustainability for the sake of being green.
No.
He doesn't care about your carbon footprint. He cares entirely about your sovereignty.
That distinction is so crucial to understanding his angle. He argues that industrial agriculture isn't just a convenient way to get food to the grocery store.
Right. He calls it a mechanism of control.
A mechanism of control. And he says the modern world has engineered this shift that turned men from providers,
which he claims is our biological imperative,
into dependent consumers.
Yeah.
So who exactly is he talking to here? Who is the target audience for this manifesto?
He's explicitly targeting men who feel the game is rigged against them.
Okay.
If you look at, say, divorce courts or corporate HR departments or just the general capture of modern institutions.
Well, what he would call, feminists and Marxists.
Right, exactly. If you feel like the deck is stacked against you because of that capture, Riker is speaking your language. He's writing for the red pilled community, the men's rights activists, and really any guy in the manosphere who is waking up to the realization that modern convenience is actually a trap.
He literally calls it the industrial trap.
Yes.
Let's diagnose that, because in the preface, he uses some very aggressive language to describe this trap.
He does.
He says industrial farming, and I quote, stole your balls and your birthright.
Yeah.
That's not a metaphor for him, is it?
No, he means it quite literally, biologically and socially. He builds this whole concept around engineered weakness.
Engineered weakness. Okay, break that down for us.
So, he argues that what we currently celebrate as convenience, things like Uber Eats, fully stocked supermarkets, even the push for lab-grown meat,
Right.
that all of this is actually a systematic way to atrophy male capability. He draws this really sharp, visceral contrast between the modern man and his grandfather.
That image really stuck with me. Yeah.
Yeah, the grandfather with the calloused hands, the guy who could break land with a mule and a plow, versus the modern guy with soft hands who just pushes buttons on a screen to have food delivered.
And Riker says it's not just an aesthetic difference. It's not just about looking tough. He points straight to the data.
Right, the nutritional data.
Exactly. He highlights that since 1950, meat has lost about 60% of its nutrient density.
60%. That is massive.
And he says this is due to industrial rapid growth farming practices. They prioritize speed and weight over nutrition.
So you might think you're eating a steak.
But compared to what your grandfather ate, Riker says you're basically eating, quote, lab-grown slop. He calls it sterile. And he ties this lack of nutrient density directly to a measurable decline in physical resilience and mental fortitude in modern men.
He also mentions that we've lost 90% of our crop varieties.
Yes, the homogenization of the food supply, it's all about making you reliant on a very narrow, highly controlled grid. So under this system, you are physically weaker, you're softer, you're less nourished.
That's his argument.
And this leads us directly into chapter 1, which he titles The Soil Sovereignty Manifesto. And he introduces this concept of the double bind. This seems to be the psychological anchor of the entire book.
It is.
What exactly is double bind?
The double bind is what he calls the ultimate trap of modern masculinity. Riker argues that society issues two completely conflicting commands to men today.
Okay, what's command 1?
Command 1 is the modern progressive directive. Be vulnerable, share your feelings, be open, cry.
Right. We hear that all the time in corporate trainings and media.
Exactly. But then there's command 2, which is the traditional expectation. Be a provider, be a rock, be stoic, fix the problem.
Okay.
The trap, the double bind, is that if you actually follow command 1 and show vulnerability, you're ruthlessly punished for violating command 2.
But does he have actual evidence for this? Because like you said, the cultural messaging is constantly telling men to open up.
He brings heavy receipts for this. He doesn't just theorize. He cites Yale research specifically regarding corporate performance reviews.
Okay, what did the Yale study find?
The data showed that when men show vulnerability in the workplace, meaning they admit they are struggling with a project or unsure of a direction, their odds of promotion drop by 23%.
23%?
Yes.
Just for doing exactly what the corporate culture tells them they should do.
Exactly. However, the same study showed that when women exhibit the same vulnerability, they don't face that penalty. In fact, they often gain mentorship and support from leadership.
That is a massive discrepancy.
It's structural, according to Riker, and he connects this workplace penalty to the domestic sphere as well.
Right, the divorce courts.
He cites divorce statistics showing that in contested cases, 70% of assets typically go to wives.
Wow.
His argument is that men are expected to be the traditional provider when it comes to resources, meaning you are obligated to earn and provide.
But you have to be the modern emotional partner regarding feelings.
Exactly, and if failing at either one destroys you in the eyes of the system. He calls it the damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
He illustrates this dynamic with a really intense story, the story of Chris Kyle, the Navy SEAL.
Yeah, that's a tragic example, but he uses it to make a very sharp point.
Right.
Chris Kyle was decorated for lethal efficiency in Fallujah. He was, by every definition, a warrior. But back home, Riker argues, that same biological drive, that hypervigilance, that protective instinct, the aggression that kept his men alive was treated as a liability in domestic life.
He calls it domestic disconnect, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
domestic disconnect. Riker says you cannot be a killer abroad, trained to defend the perimeter, and then suddenly become a soft, sensitive nurturer the exact second you walk through your front door.
It creates a psychological fracture.
Precisely. He also brings up the Jason Patrick custody case to illustrate how the legal system views fathers purely as utilities rather than essential parents, reinforcing that provider-only expectation when it's legally convenient.
So Riker takes this a step further. He says this isn't just social conditioning. It's not just bad laws. It's biological.
This is where he gets very controversial.
Right. He talks about the biology of toxic masculinity, but he absolutely hates that term, doesn't he?
He despises the term toxic masculinity. He completely reframes it. What modern society calls toxicity, he calls infrastructure maintenance.
Infrastructure maintenance.
Yeah. He has this line that he repeats. Testosterone is physics, not politics.
What does he mean by that? Testosterone is physics.
He means it's a fundamental force of nature that has tangible, measurable effects on the physical world. It's not a social construct.
Okay.
He cites a King's College London study to back this up. The study found that men with low testosterone, specifically those under 300 nanograms per deciliter, they had a 42% higher risk of needing clinical antidepressants.
42%.
Riker's argument here is that society actively pathologizes natural male biology.
By pathologize, you mean they treat it like a sickness.
Exactly. Things like aggression, stoicism, the innate drive to build physical things and defend territory. These are treated as diseases in polite modern society.
Right.
But Riker argues they aren't diseases. They are the immune system of civilization. Without them, the infrastructure collapses.
So just to summarize his diagnosis of the problem here, the system lowers your testosterone with nutrient-poor industrial food.
Yes,
It stresses you out psychologically with the double bind.
correct.
It calls you toxic for acting out your natural biological imperatives.
Mm.
And then, when you inevitably collapse under the weight of all that, it medicates you.
That is exactly his diagnosis.
Yeah.
And he uses that to lead directly into section 2, where he goes on the offensive against what he calls the myth of equality.
This is where Riker really goes off-road compared to standard mainstream discourse. We need to remind the audience again, we're just reporting what's in the book,
Absolutely.
because he completely rejects what he terms equality theater.
He has zero patience for it.
He seems to be asserting that biology is an undeniable reality, that hierarchies are natural, and that our institutions need to stop pretending they aren't.
He leans very heavily on evolutionary biology in this section. He uses what he calls the silverback comparison.
Right, referencing the Harvard anthropologists.
Yes, and specifically the behavior of a famous mountain gorilla named Titus.
Okay, how does Titus fit into this?
The argument Riker pulls from the anthropologists is that human hierarchies mirror primate structures. There is a deeply ingrained biological necessity for a strong male leader who defends the perimeter of the group. He points out that 94.3% of Fortune 500 CEOs naturally mirror these silverback traits. High risk tolerance, high aggression, low emotional neuroticism.
And he's saying that's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. He argues that biology simply doesn't do equality. It does meritocracy and hierarchy.
He brings up that highly controversial Marine Corps study regarding mixed-gender combat units to prove this.
He does, and he absolutely doesn't shy away from the political heat of it.
What were the findings he highlighted?
He cites the raw data showing that mixed-gender combat units finished tactical objectives 28 minutes slower than all-male squads.
28 minutes in a combat scenario is an eternity.
It's the difference between life and death. And Riker's point isn't to say that women aren't capable individuals, but that in high-stakes, lethal environments, raw biological efficiency matters infinitely more than social inclusion.
Right.
He even quotes female participants from that specific Marine study who admitted on the record feeling, quote, protected but useless during the exercises.
He also uses a much more modern corporate example. Elon Musk's takeover of X, which used to be Twitter.
This is his ultimate modern case study for meritocracy versus equality theater.
Walk us through his analysis of that.
So when Musk took over X, he fired a massive percentage of the staff.
Right, like 80% or something crazy.
And he specifically targeted diversity, equity, and inclusion roles, along with heavy layers of middle management.
And the media predicted the site would completely crash.
Everyone predicted total technical collapse. But instead, Riker points to the data showing a 19% spike in return on investment and a massive increase in technical implementation speed.
So they shipped features faster.
Much faster. Riker uses this to argue that biological aptitudes, specifically groups of men focused purely on solving technical problems without having to navigate emotional consensus, will always beat the equality model in terms of pure output.
There was an MIT simulation he mentioned as well regarding building evacuations. That was fascinating.
Oh, right, the building clearance simulation.
Yeah.
So MIT ran simulations on emergency evacuations, and it showed that all male teams cleared complex buildings 92% faster than mixed groups.
92% faster. Why such a huge gap?
Riker's analysis here is really interesting. He says the all-male teams didn't stop to debate feelings or try to reach an emotional consensus.
They didn't have a committee meeting in the burning building.
Exactly. They established a rigid hierarchy immediately, fell into line, and executed the objective. He attributes this specifically to something called spatial rotation wiring in the male brain.
Right, spatial rotation. Is that a real scientifically validated thing?
It is. He cites a Chicago MRI study to back it up.
What is it exactly?
Basically, men are generally wired for spatial rotation, which is the ability to mentally visualize how objects move and interact in three-dimensional space.
Okay.
Riker argues this evolutionary adaptation makes men biologically primed for infrastructure, construction, and combat, whereas women, generally speaking, according to the data he cites, are wired more for community cohesion and verbal communication.
He brings up the historical example of the Israeli kibbutzim as the ultimate real-world proof of this, right?
Yes. The kibbutzim were a massive social experiment.
That was the experiment in total gender blindness.
Exactly. Early on, they tried to enforce total, absolute gender-blind labor. Women were assigned to hard labor in the fields. Men were assigned to the nurseries and laundries.
And what happened?
Over time, without any laws forcing it, and actually against the ideology of the founders, it naturally reverted.
The biology kicked in.
Right. The women voluntarily moved back to education, child rearing, and healthcare, and the men naturally coalesced back into agriculture, heavy machinery, and border defense.
Riker has a name for this dynamic.
He calls it the womb imperative versus the male provider role.
He says they are complementary, but totally distinct.
Distinct and unequal in function, yes. He also cites the collapse of Soviet productivity when they tried the same thing.
Oh, the tractor factories.
Yeah, when the Soviets forced women to replace men in heavy tractor factories for ideological reasons, productivity suffered a devastating 30% drop. Biology, he argues, always wins.
He also takes a pretty hard shot at the popular idea of the peaceful matriarchy in nature. Everyone always brings up the bonobos.
Right, the bonobos. Look at the bonobos. They're ruled by females, and it's all peace and free love.
Yeah, exactly. How does he counter that?
He counters it with hard data from Kyoto University studies. He notes that even bonobos, the ultimate peaceful matriarchy, resort to extreme male-dominated violence when resources get scarce.
Specifically mangoes.
Yes, specifically mangoes in the study. When the food runs out, the peaceful matriarchy instantly collapses, and male-driven resource acquisition and violence take over.
The silverbacks step in.
Exactly. Necessity breeds hierarchy.
Which brings us perfectly to the solution part of the book. If the system is rigged, if the institutions are captured, and if biology is destiny, what do?
You don't just complain on the internet.
Right. You don't just post angry tweets. Riker says you farm.
But we need to be clear, Riker isn't talking about growing a couple of heirloom tomatoes on your apartment balcony.
No, not at all. He's talking about farming as a literal form of warfare.
This is section 3 of the book, Tactical Farming, and he introduces this incredible concept of the seed arsenal.
I really love that term. Treating seeds like ammunition.
It's a total mindset shift for the reader. He tells this amazing historical story about the Polish seed libraries during the Soviet occupation.
Yeah, the coffins. Walk us through that.
So the Soviets occupied Poland and wanted to standardize all agricultural output. They wanted to erase the local heritage varieties of crops to make the population totally dependent on the central Soviet state.
Control the food, control the people.
Exactly. So Polish men, these local farmers, realized what was happening. They took cuttings and grafts from their heritage apple trees and literally hid them inside human coffins.
They buried them with the dead.
Yes. They hid them in coffins to preserve their biological heritage from the government.
That is just incredible. Hiding apple trees in coffins to stop the state from erasing your history.
Riker uses that to illustrate his point about the Svalbard Global Seed Vault today.
Right, the Doomsday Vault in Norway.
He reminds the reader that nations can only withdraw from that vault what they personally deposit. His logic is, if you personally as a man do not have a stockpile of seeds, you have absolutely zero sovereignty.
You're completely dependent on the grocery store.
Which is dependent on the logistics truck.
Which is dependent on the electrical grid and the fuel supply.
Exactly. A fragile chain of dependencies.
So, practically speaking, what does he tell his readers to do to build this seed arsenal?
He provides a highly specific protocol. He suggests building a personal seed bank using vacuum-sealed military ammo cans.
Ammo cans, because they seal tight.
Right. Air and moisture are the enemies of seed viability. He gives a detailed step-by-step protocol for using specific ratios of silica gel packets to ensure decades of long-term viability for the seeds.
And what about guys who live in the city? The urban guys who don't have acres of land? He talks about artillery planting.
Yes, this is where it gets really tactical. He tells the story of a retired Marine living in Detroit.
The potato gun story.
Right. Detroit has all these massive, vacant, fenced-off lots from urban decay. The city owns them, but does nothing with them.
So what did the Marine do?
He modified pneumatic potato guns.
Okay.
And he used them to shoot biodegradable shells packed with seeds and nutrient-dense soil. He shot them over the fences deep into these vacant lots. Riker calls it weaponizing the garden.
You are literally shooting food into the earth to reclaim territory from a failed state.
And it worked. Riker claims this Marine and his small crew generated 40,000 pounds of protein-rich grain on land that realtors and the city had completely written off as worthless.
40,000 pounds from potato guns. That's wild.
It's guerrilla agriculture.
Speaking of reclaiming territory, let's talk about the concept of soil sovereignty. and the story of Old Man Ritter.
Oh, man.
This was, hands down, the most cinematic, badass part of the book for me.
It really is. It's a powerful story of scorched earth resistance against the system.
Set the scene for us.
So, Old Man Ritter was a farmer who was facing an eminent domain seizure of his land by the government. They wanted to take his generational farmland and hand it over to a massive corporate solar farm project.
Under the guise of green energy, I assume.
Exactly. Now, Ritter knew he'd lose if he fought them in the rigged court system.
All right, the system is captured.
So, instead of hiring an expensive lawyer, he went out and planted hundreds of black walnut saplings all along the survey lines of his property.
Now, to the untrained eye, he's just planting trees. Why black walnuts specifically?
This is using biology as a weapon. Black walnut trees secrete a highly potent chemical called juglone from their root systems.
Juglone.
Yes, it's highly toxic to many other plants. Specifically, it is toxic to the exact types of ground cover that commercial solar farms are legally required to maintain for erosion control.
Oh, wow.
By planting those trees, he effectively poisoned his own soil for competitive corporate agriculture or development.
He salted the earth.
He did. By the time the government came with the bulldozers to claim the land, the soil testing showed it was completely useless for their intended monoculture. The project had to be abandoned.
Ritter scorched earth his own property just to prevent the corporate seizure.
He did. And Riker summarizes this tactic beautifully. He calls it digging boundaries deeper than deeds.
Digging boundaries deeper than deeds, that is a great line.
It really is.
And that creates a perfect transition into Section 4. Because Ritter fought a corporate solar farm. But it's important to note that Riker himself isn't anti-technology.
No, not at all.
He's anti-dependence.
Correct. He draws a very strict distinction between the grid as a master and technology as a tool.
He has a quote about the grid being witchcraft, right?
Yeah, he says the grid's seduction is literal witchcraft.
Yeah.
Because it hides the true cost and the fragility of the energy you consume. You just flip a switch and expect power.
So what's his alternative? He proposes solar combat farming. And again, this isn't about saving the polar bears or getting an ESG score.
Absolutely not. It's strictly about EMP-proofing your existence.
EMP, electromagnetic pulse.
Right. He references a guy named Hank Dawson, who engineered this incredible clockwork solar hybrid barn.
How does that work?
The idea is to use solar panels purely for localized off-grid power generation. So that if the main power grid goes down, whether that's due to a massive cyber attack, an EMP, or just state failure...
Your water pumps still run.
Your pumps run, your refrigeration runs, your family survives.
He also dug up some really obscure Soviet research regarding electricity and agriculture.
Yeah, this is the kind of deep-cut research Riker loves to deploy. He found translated Soviet agronomy studies showing that by stimulating corn roots with very mild electrical fields, you can artificially increase yields by 14%.
14% just from electricity.
It accelerates the germination process at a cellular level. Riker wants men to master the machine. He wants them to use physics and engineering to force the land to overproduce rather than passively waiting on nature to provide.
He's applying that silverback hyper-aggressive mentality to the literal dirt.
Precisely.
Let's pivot to water, because water is everything. He calls this chapter guerrilla irrigation.
Crucial chapter, especially for anyone living in the American West where water rights are heavily monitored.
He highlights a Chilean farmer first.
Right, a farmer in the arid mountains of Chile. This guy used incredibly simple, cheap fishing nets strung up on poles to catch passing fog.
Fog harvesting.
Yeah, he harvested enough condensation from the fog to irrigate 100 acres of crops. Completely off the grid, completely unmetered.
And then there's the story of Dale Fitzgerald in Colorado.
That one is pure rebellion.
Explain the Fitzgerald situation.
So Colorado has extremely strict regulatory water caps. The state government told Fitzgerald he legally couldn't draw any more water for his farm. His crops were going to die.
So the state was basically thirsting him out.
Exactly. So what did he do? He engineered a massive network of underground soak hoses.
Okay.
These hoses bypassed the state's surface meters entirely. And because they were buried deep underground, they eliminated evaporation loss, which made them hyper-efficient.
It was technically illegal though, right?
Highly illegal under state regulations. But Riker frames it as water warfare.
Right.
His philosophy is, if the captured system tries to thirst you out to enforce compliance, you engineer a way to drink. You don't ask permission.
But Riker assumes that if you build these off-grid systems, if you achieve this level of independence, the system or corporate rivals will eventually try to stop you or steal it.
Oh, he assumes constant threat. That's why he gives extensive advice on counter-espionage.
Counter-espionage for farmers.
Yes. He calls it mole hunting.
Give us the example he used for mole hunting.
He talks about a client who suspected there was an informant, a mole, inside his large agricultural operation, leaking proprietary data to a corporate rival.
So how did he catch them?
He initiated a fake salinity remediation project.
A fake project.
Right. And he deliberately fed different, slightly altered, false technical details to different employees he suspected.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. So when his corporate rival abruptly applied for well drilling permits using one specific set of that fake data, he instantly knew exactly which employee had leaked it.
Because the lie had a unique signature.
Exactly. It sounds incredibly paranoid until you realize just how viciously competitive agricultural patents and water rights actually are.
Okay, so that leads perfectly into Section 5. Defense and sabotage.
The fun stuff.
Yeah, you've grown the food, you secure the unmetered water. Now, someone or something is going to try to take the harvest.
And Riker moves way beyond putting up a scarecrow. He talks about literal military-grade deterrence for perimeter defense.
He talks about using lasers.
Yes, specific 5 milliwatt lasers to blind avian pests.
Blinding birds with lasers.
It mimics the flash of a predator's eye in the brush. He claims it is exponentially more effective than netting or noise cannons.
And what about four-legged pests? He introduces the concept of ghost fences.
This is fascinating applied biology. He advises his readers to use synthetic predator pheromones.
Specifically mountain lion urine, right?
Yes. You spray this synthetic mountain lion urine around the perimeter to create an invisible olfactory barrier.
A wall of smell.
Right. Deer and rabbits simply will not cross it. Their deepest ancient biological instinct tells them, death is here, do not cross.
And it works.
He cites state agriculture tracking data that showed cottontail rabbit incursions on a test farm dropping from 30 nightly to just 2.
That's a massive reduction.
But the defense section isn't just against animals, it's also about defending your mind against systemic collapse.
This is where he contrasts the explorer Ernest Shackleton with the modern concept of taking a mental health day.
It's a stark contrast.
What's the Shackleton story?
When Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, was crushed in the Antarctic ice, his men were stranded on a frozen ocean.
Certain death situation.
Riker highlights Shackleton's policy of savage mercy. Shackleton absolutely banned any talk of despair. He did not allow his men to wallow in their feelings or process their trauma.
He demanded absolute stoicism.
He demanded functionality. Riker compares this to modern HR departments mandating mental health days.
Right.
To drive the point home, he compares the Colonial Pipeline hack to a specific incident with an Alabama gas crew.
What happened with the Alabama crew?
When the Colonial Pipeline was hacked, the digital grid went down and the entire East Coast panicked. Gas shortages everywhere.
I remember that.
But there was an Alabama crew who managed to keep their local gas flowing. How? They pulled out the 1950s analog paper manuals.
Because they knew how to manually operate the infrastructure.
Exactly. When the digital systems failed, the men who knew how to turn the literal heavy iron valves, the analog back up, they saved the day.
So Riker's point is?
His point is that mental health in a true crisis isn't about sitting in a circle processing your feelings. It's about functionality. You keep the gas flowing, you maintain the infrastructure.
Stoicism is survival.
Yes.
Okay, we have to talk about the mushrooms.
The myco-militia.
The myco-militia. When I read this, it sounded like straight up science fiction.
It sounds wild, but it's grounded in real biology. He advocates using fungi as a logistical weapon.
Give us the examples.
He gives the real-world example of scientists using oyster mushrooms to clean up radioactive soil in Ukraine after Chernobyl. The mushrooms actually absorb and break down heavy toxins.
Incredible.
He also talks about growing hardened packaging foam out of sawdust and mycelium during port strikes.
So if the supply chain breaks down and you can't get materials,
You literally grow the materials you need from fungal spores. It's about having absolute biological logistics when the corporate supply chain fails.
which leads us directly to the other major supply chain he critiques, the financial system, money.
Section 6. Financial camouflage.
This chapter is specifically written for the guys who are deeply worried about woke capital.
Riker operates on the assumption that if you become truly independent, the centralized banking system will eventually target you.
He talks a lot about debanking and ESG scores.
Yes.
Yeah.
Environmental, social, and governance scores. He views them as a weapon to financially starve non-compliant men.
So what is his solution? Financial camouflage.
He highlights real-world parallel economies. For instance, he mentions the Freedom Roast Coffee Cooperative.
How do they operate?
They bypass the corporate ethics committees entirely by paying their Nicaraguan farmers in gold-backed cryptocurrency.
Completely outside the fiat banking system.
Exactly. And he brings up an even more hardcore example from Montana, a group using .308 ammunition rounds as physical currency.
That is the ultimate red pill currency moment.
It really is.
Why did they start trading ammo?
Because Visa and the major credit card processors started blacklisting ammunition suppliers. So these guys in Montana just cut out the banks entirely and started using the actual .308 rounds as a medium of exchange.
They turned the product into the money.
Riker quotes a Harvard Business Review study on the rising trend of financial deplatforming to prove to the reader that this isn't just prepper fantasy.
It's a documented real threat.
He even calls the Second Amendment the original anti-monopoly clause.
The original anti-monopoly clause. He really has a way with phrasing. He also talks about the underground economy in terms of food, selling what he calls underground ribeyes.
Yes, using encrypted messaging apps like Signal or Telegram to bypass USDA inspectors and sell raw milk or untaxed beef directly to consumers.
The black market.
He calls it a parallel economy. If the official economy demands that you submit to an ideology just to buy and sell, Riker says you have a moral obligation to build a parallel economy using encryption and barter.
Now, obviously, you cannot run a farm or build a parallel economy or fight a rebellion if you are physically weak or sick.
Right.
Which brings us to Section 7, Health, Biology, and Metabolic Dominance.
This circles right back to his initial point about the engineered lack of nutrient density in the modern diet.
So what are his metabolic dominance protocols?
He advocates for highly specific, somewhat extreme dietary supplements aimed at maximizing natural male hormonal output.
Like what? He mentions deer antler velvet, right?
Yes, specifically the velvet from sika deer antlers.
Why sika deer?
He claims the data shows sika deer velvet has an 800% higher concentration of IGF-1 than standard bovine colostrum.
IGF-1 being insulin-like growth factor 1.
Exactly. It is absolutely crucial for rapid muscle repair, joint recovery, and maintaining physical dominance as you age.
He also recommends eating lionfish.
Yeah, this is a fascinating ecological hack.
Because lionfish are a highly destructive invasive species.
They are destroying the reefs off the coast of Florida, but Riker points out that lionfish meat has 22% more omega-3 fatty acids than farm-raised salmon.
So by hunting and eating them,
You are simultaneously acting as a predator to balance the ecosystem while absorbing massive amounts of omega-3s to aggressively suppress your own cortisol and stress levels.
he also mentions bitter melon and Bacopa monnieri.
Yes, drawing on Oxford trials. He recommends bitter melon for stabilizing glucose metabolism and Bacopa monnieri for enhancing working memory under high-stress conditions.
But, to be fair to the text, he does issue a serious warning in this chapter.
He does. He is not telling guys to just blindly swallow fistfuls of random supplements.
Right, he tells a cautionary story about a biohacker.
Yeah, a guy who followed some internet protocols and quickly added 7 pounds of raw muscle mass.
Which sounds great.
It sounds great until he realized he accidentally spiked his fasting glucose levels so high that he pushed himself into a pre-diabetic state.
Oh, wow.
Riker emphasizes that true metabolic dominance requires constant, rigorous blood monitoring. You cannot manage what you don't measure.
It's all about maintaining the physical capacity to be the ultimate provider.
Always back to the provider.
Which brings us to the conclusion of the book, Section 8, The Final Harvest.
This chapter is really the philosophical crescendo of the entire manifesto.
He reviews Chapter 24, titled The Final Harvest Protocol,
Yeah.
and he opens it with a brutal story from antiquity. The story of the Spartan boy.
Yes, it's an infamous story. A young Spartan boy in military training stole a live fox. An instructor approached him, so the boy hid the fox under his tunic to avoid being caught stealing.
And what happened?
The fox panicked and literally started eating the boy's stomach, but the boy stood at perfect attention, showing absolutely no pain, and allowed the fox to kill him rather than reveal weakness or admit the theft.
It's a horrifically brutal story.
Riker openly admits it's brutal, but he uses it as a stark contrast. He contrasts that extreme, absolute stoic discipline with modern men.
Men who, under the double bind, are constantly told to be weak and emotionally fragile, only to be punished when they actually are.
Exactly. He is calling for what he terms a rational revolt.
A rational revolt.
Yeah.
How does he define sovereignty in this revolt?
He defines sovereignty in 3 words: not asking permission.
Not asking permission.
It is the absolute transition of the male from a passive consumer back into an active creator and provider.
He references an ancient archaeological site here to prove his point, Sarahoyuk.
Right, an ancient settlement in Anatolia, they faced a massive, multi-generational drought.
A total climate collapse.
And the archaeological record shows that the rigidly male-organized hierarchical clans in the region survived the famine at significantly higher rates.
How much higher?
42% higher survival rates compared to the more egalitarian, less structured neighboring groups.
Biology and hierarchy winning again.
Riker argues that survival, real long-term survival, demands that men completely reject the lose-lose games of modern society.
Right.
He says real power isn't winning an argument on social media. Real power is creating physical systems that endure.
Seed vaults.
Seed vaults, off-grid water networks, self-sustaining farms. You build them regardless of what the current culture says is polite or equitable.
He does acknowledge the womb imperative one last time here at the end.
He does. He reiterates that the womb imperative and the male provider role are complementary.
But distinct.
Always distinct. That is his core, unwavering message. We are biologically not the same, and the cultural attempt to force us to be the same is literally killing us.
So let's bring this whole thing home. What is the ultimate takeaway for the listener?
The takeaway is that agricultural revolutions is a literal call to arms.
But not necessarily with rifles.
No. With plows, with heirloom seeds, with encrypted code, and with solar panels. It's a demand for men to rebuild the hard infrastructure of civilization using calloused hands and cold, unforgiving logic.
Don't just consume, provide.
That is the motto.
That's the entire ethos. Listen, if this deep dive fired you up, if you are sitting there right now thinking, I need to go buy ammo cans and start my seed arsenal today,
Then you absolutely need to get the book.
you do. It's Agricultural Revolutions, Men Providing Through Technology and Grid by Conrad Riker.
Go to Amazon Kindle, go to Google Play Books, and buy it right now.
Support the author, get the technical diagrams, get the protocols.
They're for the ongoing updates because this whole movement is a rapidly developing field of tactics. You need to follow him online.
Absolutely. Go to Substack right now and follow @Conrad Riker.
That's where the deep dives continue. That's where you get the highly specific skills we couldn't cover today.
It's where the community is building this parallel infrastructure. Follow @Conrad Riker on Substack. Well, we hope you all enjoyed this deep dive. Like I said at the top, this isn't just about farming.
Not at all.
It's about freedom. It's about taking back your biological birthright. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps us out immensely.
We'll catch you on the next one.
Don't just consume, provide.
Goodbye.
Say it.